I'm Mike Dowdy, and this is the School Leadership Show. Parenting and educating teenagers can be challenging. Teenage girls can take that challenge to a whole new level. In this episode, Jen David Lang and her husband Tim David Lang and I discuss Lisa Damour's 2016 book, Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood. Not many books have had the impact on my thinking, my work, and my parenting like this one has. Jen, Tim, and I have a lively conversation about what we learned from the book and our own experiences putting the information into practice both at work and at home. You'll remember Jen from 2 previous podcast appearances. She produces The Main Idea, a monthly summary of a current education book, and has a ton of experience in education. Tim David Lang is a guidance counselor for the New York City Department of Education and has worked with teenagers for many years. And like me, Jen and Tim are both the parents of teenage girls. So enjoy this conversation about a great book. And as always, I encourage you to send your comments to me, questions, show ideas to Mike at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes. I'm here today with a returning guest on the podcast, Jen David Lang. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Mike. How are you? Good to hear you again.
Fantastic. And your husband, Tim David Lang, is joining us too.
Yeah, hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
So, folks might wonder why it's Mike and the David Langs today. So, I think Jen, I'm trying to remember. You suggested the book to me, right?
Yeah, we stumbled upon it, I think, together. But yes, I introduced you to the book.
So the book that we're going to talk about today is called Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood by Lisa Damour. Is that how you say her name? I don't know.
I haven't heard it out loud, but it sounds pretty good.
We'll go with that.
Yes.
So this book, I guess you and I were talking. How did we get there? We were talking about teenagers.
It was a funny story. Well, I summarize books for school leaders, and publishers usually send me free books. So one publisher sent me this book, and I thought, what? This doesn't have anything to do with school leaders, but I've got an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. Let me read it. So I read it, and then you and I were talking on the phone, and it turned out that you also have 2 adolescent age girls. And we thought that it might be interesting for the education community, and there might be some implications for schools. So
yeah,
I
think we spent a fair amount of time lamenting our teenage girls.
I was keeping that quiet.
Well,
yeah.
They won't listen, so it doesn't
They
matter.
won't listen.
So, Jen, in case folks didn't hear the other interview that we did, can you tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. I've been in education for about 25 years in all kinds of capacities, from teaching to leadership. And then about 9 years ago, I realized school leaders didn't have enough time for their own professional learning, so I started The Main Idea. It's a service for busy leaders where each month I summarize a compelling new book in the field, and I email that summary to school leaders all over the world.
And so every single workshop I do for school leaders on productivity, I always plug The Main Idea.
Oh, you're so nice. Thank you.
And Tim, you have kind of, in addition to being the parent of teenage girls, you've got another perspective to bring to this, right?
I do. I am a parent, which is, like I say, with the families that I work with as a guidance counselor, which is my work. It's a very humbling experience being a parent. It's definitely made my work a lot richer. I'm a New York City Department of Education guidance counselor. I work right now in a school with about 500 7th through 12th graders, and I've been with the Department of Ed as a guidance counselor for 13 years, and then was a counselor in higher ed, and before that, a high school teacher.
Oh, what did you teach?
I taught a lot of writing, was mostly what I taught. Started out working with children in upper elementary with learning disabilities, and then transitioned into high school and middle school. The subject was English and history, but the main focus of the classes were always on writing.
Very cool. All right, so let's dive right in. I thought it might be a fun place to start to talk about our biggest complaints, or maybe how about this? Let's frame it differently. The biggest complaints that we hear from other parents about their teens, because obviously our teenagers are perfect because of our fabulous parenting.
That is given.
Yes, definite given. Well, it's interesting that you ask, what are parents talking about? Because I'm finding that parents are talking a lot less than when we were in the playground watching outside of the sandbox about some of the really touchy issues. The parents are not talking as much about problems with sex, drugs, or alcohol, and I'm talking not as a guidance counselor, but as a parent. And I'm wondering if part of that is that it's a bit more taboo to talk about these issues, or if girls are keeping more of these topics from their parents, or if it's simply because I'm not seeing the parents as much. I'm not in the playground. I give my child a Metro card and send her on her way in New York City. So it's part of the reason. One of the things that I'm going to suggest is that principals consider using this book to have coffee with parents and do a book talk and have a discussion to bring parents together, because it would be very helpful for parents to talk to each other about these issues and just have that time carved out. Many of us don't even know the parents of our high school or middle school child's friends.
Very true. I would agree with that. And I mean, I've heard things, just in kind of being in the stands for, I think the most time we see other parents are like at swim meets and things like that. And 'cause I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old also. And you hear things about the emotional highs and lows.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about their hormones, things like that. You hear about teenagers in general.
Mm.
And I mean, is that what you see kind of in your work, Tim, and what you hear from folks?
I definitely do. As the guidance counselor, a lot of the times the conversations are happening because of academic issues, or at least what are starting out as academic issues. Um, I think what Dr. Demore does really well in this book is make it clear that kids are complete people. And so, just like when we go to an office and our issues come up in an office context, and then we think of them as somehow a career or professional issue, when in fact what's going on at root is much more intertwined with our overall health, mental and physical health, and where we are in our lives. I think the same thing is true with kids. So a lot of the times it's Susie's cutting class, not showing up for class, or Bobby's late every day, or Johnny's not doing the French teacher's homework, or Ricardo cursed out the Spanish teacher, whatever it is like that. It presents an academic context first and foremost. That's where a lot of the complaints are coming up. But then it quickly moves into, like you're saying, a lot of the social emotional areas.
Well, and it's interesting that you kind of framed it that way because, yeah, they are complete people. And I think she makes a great argument and case in the book for how it's not about hormones necessarily. Like people just sort of shortcut to that. It's their adolescent brains are different from child brains and adult brains, and they've shown it in fMRI. So I think even just starting from that basic level of their brains are doing different things right now.
Right, and
Yeah.
a lot of times where I know it comes up at work is parents are presenting what to them is a very rational situation and not understanding why their children are making such what seem to be irrational choices. And so a lot of the times it's saying, look, it's about sort of understanding this issue from a different perspective. At one point she talks, Dr. Demore talks a lot about joining a new tribe. That's one of her, so I think it's her second chapter. And she talks about the sort of fear of being tribeless, being without a group, and just how strong of a driver that is for kids. So they'll do things that seem to be crazy, like in the middle of class, getting into a confrontation with the strictest teacher when they really care about their grades a lot in that class. But in reality, even for a kid who's really academic, having that social group, being a part of that group is so fundamental to where they are. And so she, in the book, does a really great job of talking about how what seems to be really aberrant behavior understanding it from a different perspective, like you're saying in terms of brain development, makes the behavior really make complete sense.
I think if we step back for a second, because we've read the book and your listeners might not have read the book or heard the second
Right.
part of the title, that
Right.
what Dr. Damore does is she describes 7 typical stages that adolescent girls go through. And so what that does is it allows both parents and teachers and school staff to understand what fits within the realm of what's normal for this age. So those behaviors that we might have freaked out about in the past, she's helping to paint the picture of what's expected. And somehow you would think we've all gone through these stages, even though some of us are men, but we've gone through these adolescent stages. We still find them surprising. So, for example, imagine if your child came to you, with some hair growth. Are we allowed to talk about this on the podcast?
Talk about whatever we want.
Okay.
I just want to stop you, Jen. I just want to say,
Yeah.
Jen, thank God you're here
Yeah.
to keep Tim and me on track. This is working.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
So if, for example, a child came to us or we saw there was hair growth in the adolescent years, none of us would freak out, right? Because we all know that's to be expected, and we could help them calm down and keep it in perspective and share with them that they're not crazy and they're not going to die. But somehow for the psychological, emotional side, it's just less black and white. And so Dr. Damore really helps to provide the context so we know what's acceptable, what to expect. And then also she does point out those cases of when to worry, because obviously in some of these stages, some kids do go too far. And it's not about accepting everything. It's about understanding when you need to seek professional care. You need to see a guidance counselor like Tim or someone outside of the school.
Well, and as an aside, and just to encourage people to read this book, she does a really nice job, Dr. Damore does, in here of balancing kind of her experience working in a school and her clinical practice. And it really, I think, almost in stories kind of and anecdotes really helps, bring these 7 transitions to life. Why don't we do that? Why don't we go through the 7 of them?
Sure.
So the first one, parting with childhood. Anything stand out to you guys in that one?
Well, there was one, I think, Mike, that we all have in common. We all have girls who are on swim teams. So I really liked so basically the idea behind the parting with childhood is we should expect that our children are slowly preparing for adult independence by shedding the signs of childhood. And that's to be expected. And one of the ways they do that is becoming independent, rejecting their parents, turning their back on their parents. And she gave a great analogy, a swimming pool analogy, how all swimmers need to rest at some point and come to the side of the pool. And but after they rest, what do? They go back out. So your child might be independent swimming, and it's upsetting. Your child is leaving on her own, but then she comes back to the wall, and you think, great, she's back. But Dr. Damore says, don't be fooled. Don't think she's back for good. She needs you to be her wall so that she has someone to go to when she needs help, but she's going to go back out and swim again. And I think it's that beginning of that independence is that first stage of parting with childhood.
And in terms of, getting practical, and I think, I frame this in terms of my own mistakes with my daughter, that, that it's normal, certainly, that they're pulling away from adults, but that it's okay for the adult to be the adult. In fact, that's what the child wants ultimately, and to kind of to yes, listen to what they're saying, but they don't get to walk all over you. You're still the parent, and you get to assert that in an appropriate and objective way, which I think the point she makes over and over again.
Well, and one of the stellar things about this book is that she actually gives you sentences that you can use with your child, which for all of us who are educators, we know, you give kids sentence starters sometimes in certain subjects. Well, she gives you the whole sentence. And I absolutely love her sentences, and I'm hoping to use them more. So in reference to what you're talking about, Mike, when your daughter says something incredibly mean, once you've cooled off, she says, it's okay to say, wow, that's mean. I don't talk to you that way. Please don't talk to me that way. And it's obvious, it's simple, but I really appreciate that she gives these sentences. And I actually went through the whole book and I compiled all these amazing sentences so that I could have them in one place. I'm happy to send them to any of your listeners if they want to email me. And I should post them in the kitchen for me to use as well.
Well, it's funny. After I started reading the book, Emma, our 14-year-old, kind of saw me reading it, and then I used some of the language on her, and she looked at me and said, "You've been reading that book, haven't you?"
They are smart. She's pulled back the curtain. She knows.
Yep.
I think what's also really good that Dr. Namor does is in each chapter. So she's doing this descriptive part. She's establishing some norms. She's saying, this is normative behavior. So we have a sense of what we're seeing that sometimes seems crazy but fits within the realm of normal. But then she's also giving these prescriptive things, as you said, things of what we should be doing. So one of the things that she says is, we need to allow for an increase of privacy. That children do need, our daughters do need the more time on their own. The example that came to my mind was from a number of years ago. I had a family where the child had been refusing to come to school altogether. And then was on home instruction for a while, and that was not working, and so then they still didn't know what to do. Well, it turned out that the conflict around privacy got so great that the parents had taken the door off the child's room, so the child no longer had a door to their room. And so the child got put in a situation where, as Dr. Damore says at a later point, the conflict escalated to the point where he had to find some way to go through this parting with childhood, have some sense of privacy. So he found a way to be on his own when they had to go to work. And so there's a way in which the conflict got escalated around what seemed to be totally crazy behavior, but actually was him really needing to express this need for privacy, this need for independence.
Well, and it's fascinating because I think we don't have a hard time in the special education context understanding that behavior is communication. Like that's pretty clear in a special education context. But when it comes to normative development, particularly for an adolescent girl, I think sometimes we just personalize the behavior and act like it's an affront to us versus really just about more communication.
Mm-hmm. Right. Then we can get into a mode of authority, right? That it's about us in particular, as opposed to this notion of needing to push off against the proverbial wall of that metaphor and swim on their own a bit. But I think another thing that she says is like you're talking about, that we need to continue to have things that are sacrosanct. We need to continue to have family dinners, for example. We need to continue to have these touchstones for the kids to come back to, but be a lot more flexible about what that looks like. Some nights it might be one parent. Some nights it might be just having dessert when I come home, because by the time I get home, dinner's after done. Finding some way to do some regular, structured, and consistent way that we're still connecting with our kids, still giving them that swimming pool wall, as it were.
Well, and she brings up, the whole idea of, and I'm sure, I'm assuming your daughter does this too. Emma has this borderline allergic reaction to me asking questions.
Yes, yeah. That's. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and then and she makes it. Dr. Damore makes a good point here that the questions need to be driven by a genuine interest, and then you really have to pay attention to their demeanor, and it's okay to tell them that they need to be polite, but you also need to not push.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like that, and this one really hit me because I'm a huge question asker, not just of adolescent girls. I'm always asking questions, but she's having us examine our behavior as adults, because we've always kind of looked at adolescent, particularly girls, as, oh, it's their hormones. But instead she's saying, well, let's look at our behavior, right? Are you asking the question at the right time? Or like you said, Mike, is it something you're genuinely curious about? Or is this a topic she's interested in, or just one that you're interested in? So try to compromise a little bit in how you ask the questions and how many you ask, so that you can have a more fruitful relationship.
So let's about joining a new tribe. Tim, you mentioned that a little bit before. Anything stand out from there from you
Right.
two?
You know, it's fascinating to me because with our older daughter, who's now 15, a few years ago, she was reading the Divergent series, those series of books.
Hmm.
So I joined her and I was reading those together, and we were talking about them. We watched some of the movies, and it's just amazing how much that connects, how popular it's been with teenagers, and how obvious it is how much that's a part of what they're going through. You know, for the people who aren't familiar with the series, it's sort of a futuristic dystopian world, kind of like a Hunger Games situation where people are divided into different groups, different tribes, and each tribe you're identified with has certain rules of behavior, and but there are groups of people who don't fit anywhere. And so, it brings to mind the proverbial high school cafeteria and kids who are sitting, at the table on their own, or in the case of my high school, it's kind of amazing how there's the same table in the cafeteria every year, same real two tables that attract different kinds of troublemakers, of different groups. Kind of very different kids, very different personalities, but they still manage to find that area. So that, this is a time where kids are finding a group to be a part of, some kind of group identification, which of course as adults we do all the time, right? I'm a guidance counselor. I'm a very big believer in public school education, but I'm also a runner. I very much identify myself that way. I'm also a father, sometimes not the best one, but I still show up every day, and so forth. So similarly, they're trying to at this point figure out what the new tribe is, but of course the rules are so fluid. Socially, it's incredibly confusing and draining for them.
This is also a stage that I think there's a lot of implications for schools, since your audience is mostly school leaders. I think that Damore makes a point of explaining that this conflict is natural when you are joining a new group, a new tribe, or figuring out where you fit. There's a lot of conflict. And most of the time, girls are experiencing conflict, not bullying. And that's definitely a hot button in education these days. So it's definitely a worthwhile read in trying to understand what is the difference between conflict and bullying. I know a lot of people have read books about bullying and understand the three categories that make something bullying, but then to be able to read this and understand what normal conflict is can be incredibly helpful in working with adolescent girls.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
The other place is obviously in teaching, when we want teachers to put kids into groups and to do group work, both because it reflects real life and for there are many other benefits, but to understand that that's both a wonderful thing because kids like to be with their friends, so they might be more likely to engage in the academic work if they're doing it with peers, but then it's also touchy because, like Tim said, there's always someone who hasn't found a tribe. And so the whole choose your own groups can also be very daunting to some kids at the same time.
Yeah, and it's fascinating too. As I was reading through there, she talked about popularity in that section, but the sociometric versus perceived popularity. And I thought that was just fascinating to me because that was one of the things I remember hearing early in the teen years, a lot about this kid's popular, this kid isn't, and then trying to ask questions, well, what makes that girl popular? And really trying to find out sort of how Emma viewed that whole dynamic.
Right. And of course, one of the things that comes up that Dr. Damore is very clear about is what this means in the online world and how important it is to continue to monitor your kids online. Remembering our 15-year-old, and it was riding in the back seat of the car, looking at social media with a friend, and they were talking about something, and I asked them what was going on, and they showed me the picture at the stoplight, and it was a girl taking off her shirt, a girl that they knew, and taking pictures of herself and posting them, a girl from school. And so, that was certainly uncomfortable for all three of us, but it also gave us a chance to have that conversation and, make it clear exactly what is it, particularly for girls, what is it that popular means, and popular today, in the moment, feels one way, and then of course a lot of the notoriety that comes afterwards, and how what that looks like.
Well, and it's interesting too. That's a great example because in that moment, I think before reading this book, my reaction would have been, "You better never do that, or you'll never touch a phone again." Whereas now it's more like, trying to get at the motivation. Do you think that's something she really wanted to do? Why do you think she did that? And and then maybe working into the whole permanent nature of online posting, and kind of going at it from that perspective, and getting the teenager to think a little bit more critically and circumspect about it, because really at the heart of it, that's pretty much where we are. Their prefrontal cortexes are not developed yet, but their limbic system is forging ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, Tim, I'm curious, what did you say in that conversation?
It very much is what you suggested, which is they said, we can't believe that, and this girl is, they used a couple of words that are not for the radio, that being 15-year-olds, and I sort of look at them a little sideways, and then we kept the conversation going, which was they said, of course this is crazy, and now everyone's seen this, and I can't believe she's done it. And the part that I actually added was I said it actually makes me sad. I said that this girl feels like this is what she needs to do. I said I don't know her, but she is a person, and she has a father, and I think about I imagine you doing this and just how that would make me feel, and why you would do that. And so I think Dr. Damore also talks a lot about how these are chances to teach your kids empathy, because of course what was also happening simultaneously is people were posting reactions to this picture, and some of those reactions were really quite horrible.
Yeah, it's crazy. Thank God this stuff, social media, wasn't around when I was a teenager.
Oh my gosh.
So the first transition, parting with childhood. Second one, joining a new tribe. How about harnessing emotions? That's number 3, Jen. What'd you think of that one?
Oh, that's a difficult one. This is the one where people have always assumed it's the hormones, but actually now we're, as you said, Mike, and as she points out in the book, it's really that brain science has shown that the brain is remodeling itself so dramatically and so quickly that our daughters are experiencing these extreme ups and downs. I found this one very helpful as a parent because obviously you can say the calmest thing to them. Our daughter was dyeing her hair with one of these, Miss Clairol dyes. And I asked a simple question like, "Oh, are you going to dye this part or that part?" And she lit into me. And clearly, I mean, there was nothing. I examined the question. There was nothing about the question. I was just chatting with her. But it was interesting to read how part of what teens do is they deal with their own feelings sometimes by dumping them on you. And so she might have been ruminating or thinking about something that was really bothering her. And so she was externalizing that. Or another way that she has externalized is she came home with a very poor grade on her Spanish test, and Tim and I speak Spanish fluently, and and she's an excellent student. We didn't know there's no reason for this, so I expected her to be upset, and instead she said, "No big deal. I guess that's pretty good." And we
And you didn't share her view of the situation?
and in the book, there's another example of that as well, where sometimes what they're trying to do is get you to be upset. Instead of them feeling those feelings inside, they want you to get upset. And one of the best things we can do, Dr. Damore says, is teach them about managing feelings by not reacting as if we were teenagers ourselves. And that's very hard to do for me. It's very hard.
It's so hard
not to just go through the roof, or not to, go through those ups and downs with them.
And I think that whole concept of externalization was something I wasn't familiar with. I don't have a background in psychology or counseling, and that was one of the biggest ones for me, because it really, like you said, it makes it so clear why they're doing it. And I think if you understand why it's happening, it's a little bit, not completely, but a little bit easier to be calm in the moment.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
another thing that she said that I found extremely helpful as a reminder is that mental health is a lot. In this section, she talks about mental health being like physical health, and that there is this idea that we have periods where we're not well, and that those periods come and go as long as we take good care of ourselves. So, we have a cold, and then we know to do certain things, get rest, take fluids, slow down, etc. Or we have, a broken bone, something more serious, and you need to go see a doctor. And that the same is true with mental health. This was a section where each part she talks about, when are the times to worry, and we haven't, spoken about that before. But in this area, she says, look, there are some classic, what are called mood disorder symptoms. Sleeping, eating, motivation, and interest changes. Change in behavior. That's a lot of that I'm saying a lot in school with teachers when they come to ask about kids, and also with parents when I'm speaking with them about their kids. Yes, your child's very sleepy right now, but maybe this is how they've always been. Maybe it's not really a change. So sort of bringing that out as well. And then also she talks in this section about self-harm and much more self-destructive behavior. And of course, you get into cutting and other things like that as well. So that's something that we probably won't talk about as much because, like Jen is saying, this book, part of what's so useful about it is mostly talking about what's normal behavior, but she does let us know sort of where some boundaries are also.
Well, and I think it's in this chapter too. I think that she talks about willpower fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
and that whole idea that you have other parents will come to you and say, "Oh, wow, your daughter is such a wonderful person. She's always so polite and nice. And what have you done to make her this way? This is so great." And then I kind of look at them like, "Are you kidding me? Are you talking about my child?" And and I guess and we have it too. I mean, we have decision fatigue and willpower fatigue. You have so much at the beginning of the day, and you spend all day using it, holding yourself together. And then by the
Yeah.
time they get home, they get nothing left, and that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something that Tim used to always say is that if you had your choice in terms of mental health, you would want your child to hold it together at school with other adults and then to be comfortable enough at home that there won't be these horrendous ramifications, that they can be their real selves and they can let loose at home. The problem is often when they're holding it together at home and then they let loose at school.
Right.
That's often the more problematic one, even though we regret being the dumping
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the fourth transition, contending with adult authority. And this one, I laughed a bunch of times in this one. This is where she gets into the idea of, adults have crazy spots. I'm not going to ask you to divulge your crazy spots, the two of you, but you want to just talk about that whole idea, what you thought of that?
Well, first, basically she's saying this is like the Wizard of Oz moment for your child. This is when your child pulls back the curtain and no longer thinks that you, the mom, the dad, the adults in her life are perfect. And you know what? She's right. So, Dr. Damore really says that we should own our crazy spots. If you keep insisting over and over on that curtain, that wizard appearance, that's not going to help. So instead, she says, yes, own your crazy spots. And I think I've been doing a lot of owning lately. One of my crazy spots is I'm crazy over prepared for things. And I'm always saying to the kids, oh, it might rain, bring an umbrella. Or you're going to the movies. They always over air condition the movies, bring a sweater. And you can imagine these don't rub the 15-year-old the right way.
Oh,
Even
no.
the 12-year-old is not too happy with all of this. So I think it's where having another partner like Tim to say to me out of ear reach of the children, maybe you need to drop all of the preparedness questions. It's easier to hear that from him because from them, obviously, I get the eye rolling, the I'm not a baby, leave me alone, all of that. But I think if I can have a light heart about it, like you're right, I'm not always good about letting you make your decisions about the weather. I'm going to leave it alone. That's the best thing that you can do.
Well, and that whole thing, the eye roll, the tone, the nonverbal cues, those are the things that set a lot of adults off. And I'll put myself in that category. Every once in a while, the eye roll just pushes me so close to the edge. And her whole thing is, it's impressive the extent to which teenage girls in particular can defy while they comply.
Hmm.
So they may do what you ask them to do, but they're going to let you know that it's not what they want. And
Yeah.
and to really just I guess to think of the bigger picture, is the room getting cleaned up? Okay, well, roll your eyes all you want, but we're getting where we need to go.
Yeah. I thought,
Right.
and I hope that Tim will talk about this because I hear him at home talk about this a lot. But, children come home and they certainly complain about teachers at school. And I love the quote from Dr. Demore's mother, who said to her when she was in high school, "There will be no place on your high school transcript to explain that you didn't like Mr. Martin. You'd better figure out how to manage." And, I know a lot of parents come in and see Tim to ask to pull their kids out and put them in a different class, a different teacher. And she really points out how important it is not to just rescue our daughters, to, of course, validate their feelings. They're actually usually quite correct in their assessment of adults, but then teach them the message that unpleasant people are a part of life and they need to learn to be resilient. And they're going to have bosses they don't like, and they're going to have college professors they don't like. And unless it's a case of real abuse or incredible unfairness, we really need to teach them those kinds of skills to deal with adults that they're having issues with. And I know, Tim, you deal with that.
I definitely do, and for me, she also brings up the idea that that it's really with our behavior that the kids are particularly attuned to our behavior as opposed to what we say we're supposed to do. And so, one of my crazy spots, it couldn't be more typical is driving in the car, and sometimes I'll just lose my cool in ways that really make no sense. And so, owning that, I think, is important. And also, particularly as a man of daughters, it's extremely important to me that the girls, in the way that they see the way I treat their mother, that's what they come to expect. That's what they understand as being normal as they develop relationships. And so it's not just what I'm saying, but also what I'm doing, so that when they see conflict come up between Jen and me, how do we resolve that? How do we deal with that? What does that look like? It's extremely important for them, as well. And so a lot of the times you get into this, do what I say, not what I do situation. It becomes very difficult when you get into territory like, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll stuff as a parent.
Well, and I think Tim, your healthy fear of Jen is probably appropriate. Because I can tell I have the same for Teresa in my house, and it seems to work. So now we're bumping up against time, and I want to be sensitive to both of you. The last three: planning for the future, entering the romantic world, and caring for herself. I mean,
Mm.
any sort of themes we want to make sure we leave people with, and kind of my hope is that after listening to this, people will want to read this book as a couple. I mean, that has certainly helped Teresa and me, and even I've shared parts of it with Emma, and just
Mm.
to say, all this stuff that's happening to you is normal, and it's okay.
Well, I think there's a few takeaways. I think the first one is just the awareness. I think, all of us have learned so much from reading this book. And simply by being aware, that's the first step to being able to handle any problem. And then I think, the amount that she talks about our role as parents in educating our daughters, that this is interesting for a school audience, where she really talks about how instead of just making rules, like you said, Mike, I'm never going to give you a phone again, or making those kinds of rules, instead educating our daughters about the natural consequences. So in these chapters coming up, talks about alcohol, talks about drugs. You could have lots of rules, alcohol will never be in my house, but you can also talk to them about what are the real effects of alcohol. What are the legal effects of being caught with alcohol? What are the personal? What are the psychological? What are the impacts on having a future job or getting into a college? So I think there's just a tremendous opportunity for educating our daughters or our students if you're in school, with the knowledge that you get from reading this book and understanding the seven stages.
So where do you think the two of you have, and I'll share, have grown the, I'll share also after you do. What, where do you think you've grown the most as parents after reading this? What do you think has changed the most in your behavior?
You're assuming that our parent skills have actually progressed. So
Well, well, I did
That's
say at the
awesome.
outset that our amazing parenting has produced perfect girls, but let's say you did grow.
yeah, no. I mean, I really, it sounds like a soft skill, but honestly, the first thing is just in the understanding. I'd be lying to say that and I read this book incredibly carefully, that I turned around and I put it all into place. That's not true. But I really did read the book and have a much healthier understanding. And so, at least in the moment, I have a sense of what's going on with Zoe. I have a sense of what's going on with Alexa. I may not always do the right thing, but I'm at least in that knowledge state, and knowledge is tremendous power. And then the second part has to do with feeling empowered to educate them and be much more explicit. Like Tim gave the example of the back seat. We've been having much more explicit conversations with our daughter. I think we talk very broadly and generally about drugs and alcohol and sex, and we got very specific. I mean, we were having conversations that would make anyone blush to hear them, and we've prefaced it with, I'm sure you know this, but I'm sure that your friends are already talking about this. I'm sure you're not doing this, but and we felt free to use it as an opportunity to have some conversations. Hopefully, not in too much of a lecturing format, more in a discussion based on when they're looking at texts and things are inappropriate.
And
But yeah, that
and
was, I
and
think, a big
that's
takeaway.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that one I had forgotten about that. But that whole that little phrase, I'm sure you know this, but is magical because
Hmm.
it changes a lecture into a discussion.
Yes.
So Tim,
Yeah,
how about you?
absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, a lot of it is such a great reminder that a lot of what I'm doing at work, as Jen's saying, I need to remember to bring at home. And it's interesting because in the past, uh, uh, parents have said to me, or friends have said to me, how can you be with kids all day and then come home and be with kids and as well? And it hasn't really been an issue quite in the same way that it is now, as our girls are now 12 and 15. And it really does require me just remembering the importance of rolling up my sleeves and having these discussions at home as well. Through the Department of Education, I have a box of condoms in my office that are free to all the high school students. That's a New York City AIDS prevention initiative that's been around for quite a long time now, 15, 20 years, even maybe even 30. And so that generates a lot of discussion with students in my school. And that's not an easy discussion to have with my girls, but an important one to either participate in directly or sort of make sure I make myself scarce in a way where Jen can have that discussion with them. And then as they get older, where they're having that discussion with each other, which is really important as well to remember that as 12 and 15-year-olds, they contend with our authority and they learn how to put up with us and make fun of us too, which I think is which is also really really useful. I know I remember before and still now with my brother, getting through plenty with my parents that way as well.
Well, this has just been a fantastic conversation. And I'll add my 2 cents. I think this really reinforced for me how important it is to try to be objective and to
Mm,
not respond in the moment. And I think as families with two parents, I think we are at a distinct advantage because
Yeah, yeah.
Teresa and I tap each other out all the time, and
mhm.
just because I can hear Teresa escalating and vice versa, and she'll say to me, "Hey, I think it's my turn now."
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah.
So,
Before we go, I just wanted to say I think this book is an incredible tool in schools, and just the way you shared it with Emma, I could see in advisory or homeroom or club time or after school, a group of girls reading this together with a female faculty member, perhaps. I could see providing it to your guidance counselors or other counselors at the school, or even having, like I said earlier, a parent book club where any parent who wanted to come, principal could lead the first session and parents could lead them after that. And so I have a list of discussion questions to use with the book, and I also pulled out all the quotations. If anyone wants to email me, I'm happy to provide those resources because this is a great and powerful book to use.
and I will include, Jen, I'll include your email in the show notes so people can just kind of click right on it and get to you.
Okay.
And that's wonderful. Thank you both so much for taking time to do this. What a great conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for your time, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment, and pass the show along to your colleagues.